Hey, good people. Welcome to the Mr. Teacher, Mr. Preacher podcast. This is Kevin Vota. I am the Mr. Teacher half of our duo, bringing you a mini lesson on our month's theme of industriousness called Flow and the Flinch. What the first few seconds of flow and an automatic reflex teach us about atomic industriousness. Now, what I mean by atomic industriousness is the exact same thing James Clear says when he refers to atomic habits. And those two definitions of atomic could be an extremely small amount of a thing, the single irreducible unit of a larger system, and or the source of immense energy or power. So when we talk about atomic industriousness, what I mean is simply the smallest and most powerful moment right before we begin to work hard at the start of something. So there is this moment where we get the stimulus right before we are going to respond. And that is the thing that we are going to look at, the principle of how to apply industriousness right away at the beginning. And then we'll, in future mini lessons, talk about different types of industriousness, such as astronomical industriousness, so industriousness at scale. We'll also be looking towards world-class expertise, professional industriousness, and so on and so forth. But today, let's look at that smallest possible unit at the front end. With that, we'll be examining two pieces of content, one more research-based and another one more anecdotal, equally as punchy, though. And the first is a research paper called The First Few Seconds for Flow, a comprehensive proposal of the neurobiology and neurodynamics of state onset by Stephen Kotler, Michael Menino, Scott Kelso, and Richard Husky. The second piece of content that we'll be comparing in our search for atomic industriousness is a short manifesto called The Flinch by Julien Smith. We'll be taking them one at a time, pulling out key concepts and takeaways that will teach us even more about that initial moment of industriousness and how we can apply them to an athletic experience that lasts. Before we do so, I'd like to introduce you to Amari, the mental wellness company. So if you're a parent or a coach of a young athlete or even an athlete yourself, listen up. Amari is dedicated to helping everyone in youth sports, players, parents, coaches, or even if you're beyond youth sports, achieve their full potential by supporting their mental health and fitness, because mental wellness is just as important as physical wellness. By focusing on both, we help young athletes, coaches, and parents unlock their full potential and achieve success in all areas of life. One of my favorite products of Amari's is the Happy Juice Pack. It's a perfect way to support mood, focus, and energy through the day, giving you the mental edge you need to perform your best. So the goal is to supplement your gut-brain axis, where your feel-good neurochemicals come from, because the gut is your second brain. And by supporting that second brain, we can support the first and feel and perform your best. It's one of my favorite ways to start the morning. The watermelon edge flavor is delicious, especially if you are a fruity fan, as I am. Very refreshing, great way to start the day. If you're looking for a way to take your game to the next level, head over to amare.com, amare.com/36505 to see what they have to offer, including that Happy Juice Pack. Great way to support the podcast and to learn more about mental wellness and fitness. So whether you're a parent looking to support your child's mental wellness, or a coach looking to help your entire team succeed by being in a consistently good mood, Amare has everything to boost your mental fitness. Link will be in the show notes and description. Let's jump into that first piece of content, that first few seconds of flow. The background on this is it is from the Flow Research Collective's Stephen Kotler and their chief science officer, Dr. Michael Menino. And I'm not familiar with the other two names, though they supported this study as they went forward. And what this study really was is Stephen's ongoing search to find what they call in the initial report opening sections, the precise neural mechanisms underpinning the onset of flow in the state itself. It's Stephen's puzzle. He considers flow one of the greatest puzzles he has ever come across, and he's continuing that search to understand the mechanisms or the steps to get into this state, among other things. Every angle he's looking at, it is still unclear. There's still lots of questions. They're still figuring it out. But in this study, they're looking at those first few seconds of flow and what's happening inside the brain, the neurobiology, neurodynamics of that. We're going to save you the neurobiology and neurodynamics today for everybody that's not a fan of neuroscience, or maybe has been a while since they've taken any semblance of anatomy, specifically the brain. So I'm going to leave all of that out for the grace of myself and yourselves, and really focus down on the specific takeaways that we can get for athletes, coaches, and parents in sports. It's always helpful to start with terms, the key terms that we need to take away before we get into what we learned from the first few seconds of flow. So the terms, the first term is flow. And in this particular paper, they describe it as a cognitive state that manifests when there's complete absorption while performing a task and the optimal internal, external conditions are present. Or in the introductory paragraph, an altered state of consciousness that is thought to occur when we are fully engaged in a relatively challenging task or activity matched to our skill set. Stephen often borrows Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's definition. Its flow is a state where we feel and perform our best and optimal state of consciousness. And the reason why we're even after this concept of flow is that we get a huge rush of neurochemicals that help us feel and perform our best, as the definition says, but our productivity, our performance, and our creativity skyrocket. So if we can understand how to, those first few seconds, we can reliably do the thing that we need to do the very best we could do. A few more terms. So Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is the godfather of flow, the late Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he described in his research 6 core characteristics that are present during flow. And I'll read them one by one. So number 1, you have hyper-focused, task-specific attention and complete concentration. Number 2 is this merger of action, something I'm doing, and awareness of that thing, leading to total absorption with the task. Number 3, there's a diminishment of self. You lose your ego. You're not worried about what you look like, feel like. You're just doing the thing. Number 4, there's an altered perception of time. Either it slows down or it speeds up. Number 5 is there is this feeling or sense of complete control. And the debate over why that is continues to rage. In this state, though, nothing can go wrong. There's a powerfulness that comes with that, as we'll see. And number 6, there is a significant positive affect, what is called the autotelic state, or it is an end to itself. We do it sheerly for the joy of doing the activity. It's intrinsic. So we have boosts in reward, enjoyment, pleasure, euphoria, meaning, purpose. And this could be for micro flow. So think of flow on a spectrum, which is a low intensity flow state, and macro flow, which is a high intensity flow state. So there's still some open questions that Stephen and the team, this is our next section, Stephen and Dr. Michael and others are looking at. We really want to know on the front end. Let me grab the actual specifics in the front. So number 1 is their questions that they lead with, and it's called live the questions, as Stephen would say. How does the brain transition into a flow state? And what is the temporal nature of this transition, including how long do the changes that facilitate the state onset last? And final question that they were looking at was what neural dynamical processes mark the transition into the state itself. Those are the key questions they were looking to solve. And we won't be hitting all of them, especially since we're staying away from their neurobiology and neurodynamics. At the same time, there's plenty that we can get into on these first few seconds of flow. So those were living the questions. We will leave those there. What we want to take away is what does happen? What is this fork in the road of flow? and what are those conditions that we can take in order to get into flow more frequently to perform at our best, no matter what context we are in. The fork of flow. So in this particular research paper, they come up with a hypothetical scenario of a motorcyclist going down a highway and encountering what they call an event where somebody cuts in front of them. And the motorcyclist has to perform, like recognize that there is this particular car cutting them off. Then they have to make a swerve out of the way, and then they have to counter that swerve to get back on track. And this is the event or the scenario to discuss the onset of flow. Now, for our purposes, you can just imagine some athletic event of choice where there is a stimulus and you have to make a response to it. And what that response does to you is kind of this fork in the road. So there is going to be some sort of task. There will be a novel or relevant event. So input stream coming of some sort, say hitting a baseball. And then you're going to have this fork where, depending on what happens, you go left into flow or you go right into PTSD. And I know those are extremes at this point, and we're just going to look at those just the way the paper did. So the first thing that we want to look at is, if we choose to get into flow, what needs to happen? And this is very binary, but these were key words that stood out in this paper that helps us learn what it takes to get into flow, that initial moment. We'll start with flow. On the flow side, we have action. There needs to be this motor coordination action towards a goal. There is a goal. When you are in this hypothetical scenario, whichever one you want, the motorcycle, hitting a baseball, pick your sport, you are after something. You are doing something. Flow is an action state. And what that produces is this learned powerfulness. It's a great phrase. Because effort is being exerted and you feel like you have control over your situation, and it feels good because you're making these predictions and figuring out if you get something right. And when you do get it right, you get a jolt of feel-good neurochemistry. And in that, this is a very proactive state. It is not sitting back, as we're going to see on the other side. You are going after something. Within the brain, there's mechanisms for fear extinction. So even though you would face an adverse event, you will get the extinction of fear. And what ends up really happening is it's fun. You get to use your skills. That's the euphoria that we get, is when you get to do something you like to do and you do it successfully, it brings a smile to your face. So check that out. So the fork of flow on the left, if we're going to get into flow, that is what it looks like. Now compare and contrast that, juxtapose, differentiate, pick your verb, with what happens on the end of PTSD. So same event, right? We have the hitting, we have the motorcycle incident. Well, if we are going to go into, I would call it small scale PTSD or trauma, small scale trauma, there is inaction. Now, in the motorcyclist scenario, they mentioned that, you're probably not going to freeze, because of, this high risk situation. So it'd be fight or flight. But there's usually, in the event of trauma, PTSD, an inaction or no goal. And over time, you develop learned helplessness. There's nothing I can do. So you don't have effort. You don't expel effort. It's very reactive. And when this happens and it's a negative experience, it creates fear and bad memories. And that exasperates anxiety. So the opposite of fun. And this seems very simple, where you go left, you go right, flow, PTSD. And it really can be. The paper's unbelievably complex, especially if you don't know anything about neuroscience or you're rusty on your brain anatomy. Yet at the same time, it is really that simple. And we have to make a choice up front, and we're going to go left and we're going to go right. You can try and constantly choose flow, but if you reach beyond your challenge skills ratio, you're going to face adverse events. It's the ability to come back, to choose effort, to have a goal, and have fun. That is one of the key points that I'd like to take away with everybody. There are 4 factors at the fork that got brought up. There are more. For simplicity's sake, we'll just stick to 4 factors at this fork that help us go towards flow. And one of the first ones that I am a massive fan of, and there's questions about the practicality or the deeper study into flow triggers. So flow triggers are preconditions that lead to more flow. They're on the front end. And the flow triggers that were mentioned in this particular paper were the individual flow triggers. I'm going to grab those real quick because it's very useful to hear them as they go. So what are the flow triggers that Stephen mentions? This is the most recent update that we can see of individual flow triggers. So we have, and I quote, clear goals, immediate feedback, and the challenge skills balance, where both the task challenge and then in an individual skills are high. We have B, novelty, so new, complexity, unpredictability. And the one that I'm glad we caught and it got added was insight. So you learn something. C is risk. I would include high consequences there. D is deep embodiment, or the hyper awareness of cross-sensory modalities. Just think your 5 senses. We also have the major intrinsic motivators, so the passion recipe from Stephen's Art of Impossible: curiosity, autonomy, passion, purpose, and mastery. So those are all included, and those give you dopamine, norepinephrine, or the fancy words dopaminergic or noradrenergic. These are the markers that we can have up front. So for flow to show up, you need 6 or 7 flow triggers present. At least that's what we think at this time. Again, at the end of the paper, they mentioned that we need more work and studies done on the flow triggers and the recipes that come from that. The second thing, the second one factor at the fork is your challenge skills ratio elements. Now, the challenge skills balance, as we talk about in our episode with the talent code, is very important. It's just enough to make you stretch, but not enough to make you snap. And the elements that go into this, among others, are very, very similar to just about anything with good teaching. So I'm going to grab those, but includes things like tolerance for anxiety. Excuse me. Here we go. Flowers, critical factors of the challenge skills ratio. Thanks for bearing with me. Is tolerance for anxiety. So how much can you take on a challenge that's a little bit overwhelming, is a little uncomfortable, or a lot? The ability to delay gratification. So even though what I'm doing now doesn't quite get me to my end goal, it's a step along the way. You have to be patient with your steps to delay that gratification. Confidence, which is built through repetition. Skill building is confidence building. And optimism. So you have this belief that you're going to get there one day. It's a little bit of positivity. All of those are critical factors at the fork. And even if we don't know if you need all 4 present, those are going to go up and going to go down as you go and attack a challenge of some kind anyways. Sometimes you're going to, depending if your positives like basics are, up to speed, you're sleeping well, you're eating well, you're moving, all of that stuff plays into this. It is so simple of going left and going right. There's a lot that goes into it. So those are the challenge skills ratio elements that are factors at the fork. Number 3, this one was cool. They talk a lot about the seeking system being activated. So that's one of the Yak-Panskep affective neuroscience systems that we all share. But it was this interesting talk about the dopaminergic reward and these feelings of novelty or surprise. So these were phenomenological signals that, I'm going to quote, that arises during the recognition of better than expected results. So you do something and you surprise yourself, like, ooh, I got it. Really interesting. And it provokes a P300 event-related potential. And there were two types. So the 300A was associated with novelty, and the P300B was associated with surprise. So when you get a novel and unexpected stimulus, it produces this P300B wave, approximately 300 to 400 milliseconds following presentation. The point of that is mostly the mindset of leaning in towards the novelty and towards the surprise. Like, could we? The novelty, I think, is a little bit more dopamine related. Like, oh, this is something new. I want to try something different. Whereas the surprise leans, at least to me, a little bit more towards the puzzle, the norepinephrine. Like, I wonder if. And leaning in with that curiosity is huge. So if you're an athlete, a coach, go for it. Say, if you're about to tackle something, I wonder what might happen. Our brains love predictions. And when you look at video game players and a lot of the dopamine spikes, they get it even if they fail sometimes, because you want to see if you're right. And then if you're not right, you want to go and try again. That's that autotelic loop that we're hoping for. He's like, oh, give me another chance, right? You miss it once. We're doing a game of pepper where you bunt in baseball and you miss it. You're frustrated, but you want to go again. And that's a healthy frustration. And so that P300A and B was awfully interesting and a way that you can lean in. I'm not going to separate those from flow triggers, but interesting thing to see. Another concept, the fourth, was this two words that are very close together in the paper of struggle and surrender. And I use the word "and" there on purpose. I'm not going to get into, meditation and anything else of philosophy, but their peers, there's no, in order to get into flow, you have to struggle. That's the first thing, is the first step of the flow cycle. It is a biological requirement in order, to do the work, to, wrap your myelin, to do deliberate practice, deep practice, whatever you want to call it. You have to struggle. And the reason why there's surrender in there is you got to let your automatic skills take over. You got to lean in, and there's a release phase. That's number 2 of the flow cycle. But when you get to that third stage of flow, you got to let go and just let your body do what it knows how to do. And that takes repetition. So this is why flow is so elusive and so awesome when we get to it, is that when we get there, your body just does the thing. And it's this effortless effort that it's described as. So it's a yes and. Yes to the struggle and yes to the surrender. And some people really struggle on the front end with the struggle. They do not struggle enough or struggle too much. And some people struggle with getting out of their own way with that surrender portion. And that's something that we could break apart. For now, it's food for thought. How much struggle can you take on? An inch, 1%, 4%? Can you relax and let go of your perfectionism, self-sabotage, everything else to get into flow and to take that fork to the left? Well, that's a wrap on the first few seconds of flow. I will include that in the description if you'd like to read. Warning, it is a deep dive. I expect nothing less of Dr. Michael and Stephen into that neurobiology and neurodynamics. And if you take something away that you would like to apply to sports for an athlete, coach, parent, let us know. Those were kind of the big ones that I saw without getting too far into the weeds. Let's take a turn at our second particular resource called The Flinch by Julien Smith. He is a punchy writer. If you have not come across Julien Smith, you are in for a real treat. And he wrote a manifesto called The Flinch a little bit ago. And like we did with the first few seconds of flow, it's helpful to start with terms. So what is a flinch? Not the flinch, but a flinch. And it is defined as A, to draw back or to shrink as from what is dangerous, difficult, or unpleasant. Or B, to shrink under pain or to wince. So you can kind of see it's like right where you're about to get hit, and there's that classic family, usually sibling, you fake like you're going to hit somebody and you say, hey, 2 for flinching. You hit him twice. That's kind of the technical term there. And Smith takes this and runs with it, personifies it, blows it up as this bigger concept for living. And it parallels or mimics our first few seconds of flow quite well. And that's why we're checking it out. Smith takes the idea of the flinch and turns it into, instead of a flinch, the flinch, like an opponent. Very similar if you're familiar with Stephen Pressfield's Resistance or Jane McGonigal of Reality is Broken, Super Better, or Imaginable fame as her bad guy. And so it's anything that gets in the way of you achieving your goal, your quest, your epic win, an obstacle. And in our case, in this video, it's what's stopping you from industriousness, from doing the work. In the flinch, words that popped up to describe it include it's something that's hard. It hurts. You're going to get hit. Imagine a boxing ring. You would be foolish to think if you're going to box or do mixed martial arts of any kind that you're not going to get hit. With the flinch, whatever it is on the other side of that for you, you're going to get hit. And for us, our purposes is it's struggle. You're going to get hit with struggle and it's not going to feel good. Usually there's fear and anxiety on the other end. It's not pleasant, and we're not going to pretend it's going to be, especially if it's a task worth going after. And anything that's worth going after is going to produce this reaction, this flinch. The first pattern, we're going to break this down through some of the key highlights that I want to take away because they like I said, they layer on top of the research quite well. The first one is the first pattern. In the first pattern, Smith talks about kids at play before they get afraid. And if you notice a kid at play, I have young kids. They're getting a little bit closer to the other side of this. When they're at the playground, not my kids, just kids in general, they are going to play. They're going to take risks. They're going to jump and scream and evaluate. They're actually quite good at evaluating risks, not so they don't get hurt, but just going for it. Fearless in a sense. And what inevitably happens though, they fall, they cry, they get hurt, they run to you, they get a hug, you dust them off, you wipe away the tear, and guess what they do? They go right back out there and go get it. And Smith talks that we need to be a lot more like kids in that sense. We shy away for no reason because it's a scratch. And that's something that in the flinch, we need to be careful about because he talks about there's a truth here of this distorted reality, that the anxiety of the flinch, our fears get ballooned where to the point where it's worse than the actual pain itself. We got to get to the point where it's like you do the thing, it still hurts, but that's it. It's not nearly as bad as we think it is. And one of his punchy lines, we're going to have a few of his punchy lines here, is he says, we need to get more scars. We need to live. All right. What is something worth doing if you don't get beaten up a little bit? And I mean that, and not in any negative way of any sorts, but where you're in the arena and you're doing something worthwhile. Okay. Is it really a good story if everything goes perfectly? You don't come away a little bit unscathed? Come on. So that is something that he talks about as the truth. The second pattern is this ability to spot and then move forward. And what he uses is similar to something Joel Runyon at Impossible HQ. And he talks about the two types of people with cold showers. So I want you to imagine a cold shower, very cold shower, or even a cold plunge. So if you've done a polar plunge before, I live in Minnesota. This is common. In Scandinavian culture, they take sea dips, very cold dips all the time. But imagine that moment right before you're about to get in. Let that sit. It's going to be cold. You're going to shiver. You're going to probably hyperventilate. It's not going to feel good. Smith says, observe that reaction. That method, that moment right before, can be used for everything. Right then. Doesn't have to be a cold shower. Swap it out for whatever that thing is to you that you don't want to do, but you know you should do it. That's a principle. This is the underlying principle that we're getting at with the first few seconds of flow with the flinch. So the habit he wants you to take away, one of them, the second pattern, is to see the flinch. Okay? You're right about to get in that shower. You're right about to do the thing. You don't, and move forward. Sit with it and go. Number one, he says, feel it. Feel that impulse. Feel the fact that you want to do anything else but get into that cold shower. Number two, at that threshold, know in your mind, right here, that something important is about to happen. Pay attention to that. Okay? Right on the other side is the best stuff. And number three is keep going now. This helps you break your programming, and it requires, this is really key. How do you get over this? Well, it requires a single moment of strength and of courage. I think Jamie Foxx, Tools of Titans, I think. So what's on the other side of fear? Nothing. Now, cover me here that we're not talking about fear that's going to fatally hurt you, right? We're talking about those minor annoyances that we're just masking up scenarios in our head that overwhelm us. We're not talking about life or death situations here. Those moments, though, require a 3, 2, 1, go. I hate cliff jumping. Hate it. I don't like heights. I don't like falling. And every time I've gone, when your pride is on the line, because you have family and cousins that will let you hear about it the rest of the trip, that's what you do. 1, 2, 3, go. And so you got to move quickly. Yes, feel it. Don't linger in it. Okay. Yep. And go. And once you get to the other side, you realize that was just nothing but a change from where you're at, a state shift. And that is something that we can apply as we go, where we can flinch forward at everything. Flinch forward. Good alliteration. You start small and you inch bigger. Okay? One of Smith's lines, a second punchy line that I liked, is those who face the flinch make a difference. The rest do not. Very cool. Next section is the fashion of the flinch. And I mean fashion literally, like wearing the flinch. In the flinch, Smith talks about fighters being easily identifiable, those who face the flinch. And he goes into this picture of a lion, the lion at the zoo versus the lion in the wild. One's the pet and one's the king. And he, very similar to when we did the fork in the road with flow and PTSD, talks about the lion's eyes. You can see people who regularly face down the flinch, it coursing through their veins. There's just this aura. They carry themselves differently. Kind of like Fight Club. If you ever remember the scene, they're on the bus and they start eyeing everybody up and they're holding themselves all cocky and confident. It's that. You can't fake it. They're all action, all business. Now, contrast that with the opposite. People who shrink from the flinch. They wince regularly, routinely. The dead, defeated, defensive look, almost kind of getting small. It's that broaden and build type theory, polyvagal theory, where you can just see it in the body language. Amy Cuddy would be very happy with us at this point. But you can tell where you shrink physically versus not. Those people are all talk, all show, and no go. They want the glory, as most of us do, but don't want the suffering. But what's interesting is you take on the suffering, you get uncomfortable, you embrace that comfort crisis, and you then get the glory. The flinch, as Smith says, is something you can try and avoid your whole life if you let it. And he gets ruthless once again. He is a ruthless writer and says we have enough in this life. Viewers, coaches, commentators, armchair experts, backseat drivers, people who are wearing their sweatpants and yoga pants, or maybe even no pants like the emperor with no clothes, versus people who we don't have enough players. We don't have the sweat-soaked, blood-stained, hole-ripped jersey people, mud on their face, cuts going all over, and happy as can be because they're in the ring and they're in the game. And again, binary contrast, obviously, and he does it for effect, yet it's true. Get in the game. We have enough of those. We need more of those. Let's talk about the checklist before we wrap up. Smith gives a lot of different suggestions for the tackling of the flinch. Very similar to some other things that we've come across on this channel. But the goal of the flinch is the practice of not necessarily getting used to it. Everybody says you get used to it. He says it's not that. It's feeling the pain and surviving it. I made it through that, not around it mentally, trying to block it out. No, you go right through it. What he suggests is taking on a challenge or a willpower practice with some questions to consider. A litmus test, truth filter. Is it really a flinch or not? Some things we seem to be able to tackle, some arenas, physical, mental, social, emotional, spiritual, whatever. Some arenas are easier for us than others. We're talking about ones that are a challenge. He asks you, does it hurt? Again, not fatally, not debilitatingly, but uncomfortably. Number 2, is it hard? Okay. Not so much that it's unbearable, but it's got to be hard. Does it make your brain scream? Like right before, you're like, ah. These things could include, he offers some suggestions. This is not comprehensive. Go check it out if you want to see the whole thing. Exercise, meditation, endurance of any type, cold showers, there they are again, reading, social media, friendships, relationships. In our comfort creep episode, which appears after this one, it was a deep read on Michael Easter's The Comfort Crisis. We talked about comfort creeps, personifying the biggest themes that came up in that book, and those included adversity, the elements, think the outdoors, skill or novelty, taking on learning new things, relationships, loneliness, boredom, addiction, silence, hunger, death, and germs, or sanitization as he looked at it. Any of those things work. So Smith asks you to take on something. I wouldn't say I would know whether more is better in this case. Do you have to take, is it everything, seeing the world as a flinch? You could just take it on, because we know willpower, strains as you go throughout the day. So I'd be curious about the amount of flinch and willpower challenge practice. I would say choose your fights well. Be very specific. Win the ones that matter, and lose the ones that don't matter as much. All right, let's wrap up. Atomic industriousness. So flow in the flinch. So what do we learn in the end? What does the first few seconds of flow in the flinch teach us? Well, overall, when it comes to atomic industriousness, so that initial moment, right before the cold shower, right before that fork in the road. You get this stimulus. What are you going to do? The flinch and flow are a fork in the road every single day and moment and choice towards success. That success we're looking at with John Wooden's pyramid of success. Flow begins, as Stephen has said before, when we say yes to the fight, yes to the flinch. Remember that fork. It's action. It's proactive. Bring it on straight through it. Swing back. Flinch forward and flow onward towards success and your best self. That is what we're looking for when we talk about atomic industriousness. So thank you for watching this mini lesson. It's not so mini lesson anymore now that I look up at it. Appreciate you. It's a privilege to be able to get to teach you. Be sure to like and subscribe for more Mr. Teacher, Mr. Preacher episodes. And if you did get to check out the flinch or the first few seconds of flow, let me know what you think. I'd be really curious to see what takeaways you had as well. Be sure to check out more episodes that we got. We have weekly primers that includes gratitude, smack talk, flow triggers, what we're finding that's interesting in movie and media, mini lessons like this that will correspond with the theme that we're covering, and of course, deep reads. That's it for me. Appreciate you. Appreciate being able to teach. Never stop learning, everybody. All the best.